Looks like we got some folks joining and trying to join. Might be a similar bandwidth issue. Hopefully not on Spatial's end. But some folks might recognize Aleatha. She came on as a speaker for XR and LXD a couple, I think, in her first year. And we are actually hitting our 2-year anniversary now. What was that?
Sorry, there's lag, I guess. So yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, it has been a while. It has, and yeah, the lag might be on my end, and it might be spatial. I have no idea right now. But if you're joined, but you are not Aleatha, I cannot hear you talking. So you might need to unmute yourself if you want to join in on the conversation. Although if you're not talking or you don't want to talk, then feel free to stay on mute if you like. Yep, M for mute or unmute.
I'll just come off mute to say hi to everyone and go back on mute.
Cool. Hello.
Hi.
So we might be a small group because of the holidays and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I probably didn't do as good a job promoting as I should have. So sorry about that, Aleatha. I should have been a little bit more on top of our social media. But finally back able to join meetups. It's been a while. Missed you guys.
How was your trip?
Good. It was real good. We stayed in Croatia for a few months. Did a road trip through Germany and Austria and Slovenia. And yeah, it was a pretty wild ride.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, I hope everybody is having a really good holiday season. Today, Aleatha is here to talk to us about design for immersive training and design process. And, as usual, we like to keep it conversational. So, as if you have questions or anything, feel free to chime in. Either take yourself off mute and ask questions, or you can put your questions in the chat if you're having audio issues or just don't want to just don't feel like talking. You can always put your questions in the chat and I'll read them out for us. So Aleatha is the operator and founder of Ninja Robot Studio, which is a XR design school, and she posts a lot of really great, helpful content for the XR design community and those that are trying to get into that industry to help learn and sharpen and grow skills in the area. And Aleatha, I'm going to let you tell us a little bit about Ninja Robot Studio because I'm probably leaving some things out. So go ahead and introduce us to which is probably the coolest named company ever. I think.
Yeah. Hi. If you don't know me, I'm Aleatha Singleton, and I've been a UX designer for over 24 years, designing across all kinds of platforms, including most recently XR. And my focus was mainly on VR training. An interesting segue for y'all. But I founded Ninja Robot Studio, LLC, as a way to start creating educational content and pushing XR forward within the industry because I saw that as an immersive medium, because it can alter your perceptions of reality and alter your memories, even, I realized very quickly that we definitely need to have some human-centered design around this thing. So all of the content that I see out there are tons of people out there creating XR design content. What's different about my content is that I'm focusing on the human aspect of it, whereas everyone else is usually focusing on tools like Unity or Unreal or Bezel or whatever type of prototyping tools that are out there. So I'm focusing on studying the humans and making sure that we're not harming the humans physically, emotionally, and making sure that it's an enjoyable process that's easy to use, and if it's learning, that they are actually able to focus on what they're learning and not how to interact with the environment or the hardware. So I create educational videos that you can find on YouTube. I'm going to share with you a bunch of links, including a link tree to all the different content that I create. I'll share it afterwards or give it to Tricia or whatever afterwards. And I've got a bunch of links to YouTube. I've got some playlists that y'all would specifically be interested around VR training in particular. And I also live stream. I haven't in a little bit, but I'm going to pick it back up. Live stream every other Thursday and teach UX design through gaming because we can learn a lot from video games, 2D and 3D experiences, VR experiences, because game design has a very heavy and direct influence on XR design. So we can learn a lot from the mental models and what gaming has already taught us and figured out around the space and apply that to XR. So there's a stream for that, and I just recently created a skills assessment workbook that you can, if you're wanting to get into the space, take a look at this workbook. It's a Figma template that you can go through. I've got it broken down by skills, and you can assess yourself on where you are in the skill and figure out where you want to focus based on what career path you want to take, whether it's UX specific or modeling or whatever. And yeah, there's a ton of content. I can't think of it all right now either. I'm working on a VR training course, a VR training design course. Anil's actually helping me with that, and it's in the works. It will be out soon, in a few months. And yeah, so some of the biggest things that I have seen around. Did someone have a question?
Oh, I was just going to say that that sounds like a lot of helpful resources, and I know the XR and LXD community would love to have access to whatever is available to share. And yeah, we can post those links in the Slack channel for anybody in the community who has access to Slack. If you're here or not here, you can definitely find those resources on the Slack channel after the meetup.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. Some of the biggest things that I've seen as far as a difference in between design whereas in XR, you're going to have to create 3D models of NPCs that act out the things because it is an immersive experience. And in order to make it an immersive learning experience for people, you're going to have to build out the scenarios with actual NPC characters acting out things along with you. You're doing multiplayer. And there's a lot that goes into that, and it's a lot more thought and effort involved in making sure that NPCs behave the way that you would expect them to as humans, because if they don't behave the way you would expect a human to behave with proper body language and so forth, then it is going to break the immersion and possibly distract you from your learning experience. So NPC behavior is something that's very important to pay attention to. And another thing is, instead of just taking a photo of a interface or an object that you're going to be teaching them how to interact with in a 2D learning experience, you're going to have to create 3D models of these objects instead and create full environments that they would immerse themselves into if they're doing VR. So a lot more effort. There's a lot more work to it than just, it's already a lot of work to do 2D training. It's an extra amount of work to do XR training, so it takes planning and figuring out what all assets that you're going to need up front to create as you go along in the process.
I think that's a really good point, and something for a lot of folks that that may not be really familiar with the medium or with designing for XR. That it's rare to find a one-person team, and there are reasons people specialize in all different aspects of design, and the person designing your immersive training is probably not going to be the person building it, is probably not going to be the person creating the 3D models, and it kind of takes a village to make something that big. Like even if we look at some of those popular video games you mentioned, learning from video games, there are hundreds of people involved sometimes that are building those kinds of big video games. Not that that's always necessary for training.
Several years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it can take years. And that may not be the case for every training. And not everything for training, I think, needs to be like, Blizzard quality video game style, but
right.
It definitely, is like anything else. What you put into it is going to reflect your output.
Yeah, for sure. So the production time is going to be longer. And if you look at that skills assessment workbook that I will share the link to later, you'll see that it's at least, 10 pages of skills. And if you were wanting to do all the things, you would be so discouraged looking at that skill sheet. So that's what it takes to create a quality experience, though. So that just emphasizes that you need a team for this to create a quality experience. Now, it is possible to create small experiences with one person or two people, but it's going to take longer if you want to clone. It's going to take a lot more work, and it is not going to be Blizzard quality for sure. You definitely need a team for that. Another one of the big things that I see students struggling with whenever they're trying to get into the space is, besides just thinking they can take on everything by themselves, is that they have a difficulty learning how to think spatially, and they'll immediately go to 2D tools to start designing a space, and they won't think about how this is going to feel and look in 3D space. Because we want to use the tools that we're used to, we try to use those tools to design for 3D. And then when we go to try that thing out in 3D, we can see that it absolutely doesn't work at all, or it's at the very best not taking advantage of the 360 space that you're designing for. So that's one of the biggest hurdles I see students having, is learning to get out of their 2D mindset and start to think in three-dimensional space.
You know,
Have you
something.
seen
Something that helped me with that, I think, when a couple, I think maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, I took the Create with Code series through Unity. It's a free course through Unity, and they kind of walk you through, like, if you're interested in learning Unity development and coding with Visual Basic and Unity, like it does, it walks you through all of the, like, writing code functions and kind of how to tie that into your game and your graphics and your assets. And I'm probably forgetting some of the lingo that I should be using from that course, but there's different exercises that they walk through that kind of get you thinking about three-dimensional space for different styles of games. And even though it wasn't designing for VR, I think it helped me kind of better think about and understand designing for three-dimensional space. Even for one of the games, was like, it was a 2D platformer using 3D objects, so that was kind of an interesting exercise. But yeah, there's different games that you're designing in that course that I think really help wrap your head around that three-dimensional space and designing for 3D space. So I recommend looking through that for anybody getting started that's interested in Unity development. That's a great place to start, and it's a free course.
what was the call?
That is the Unity Create with Code series. And since then, they actually have released a Create for VR series through Unity. I haven't completed those, so I've started them, and I kind of every couple months go back to it and do a little bit more and forget about for a while, and then go back to it and do a little bit more. But I want to say I like it so far, but it's been probably a good 5 months, 4 months, 5 months since I've looked at it. So I can really only speak to the Create with Code series, but both of those are free on the Unity I think it's Unity Learn or Learn Unity site. If you Google that, you'll definitely find it.
Okay. Yeah. You see it there. I checked my notes through my nose hole of my headset real quick. See if there was anything else I wanted to say. Oh, physical accessibility. This was something that when I was actually trying out a free legitimate training that I found through Steam. I was trying it out while I had frozen shoulder, so I couldn't move my right arm very far. And it emphasized to me that motor function impairments, so these are things that you don't, yes, you have to design for them whenever you're creating training experiences, but usually that's handled by whoever the platform is that you're using. But when you're designing for XR training, you're the one that has to think about it, the accessibility, the motor function impairments, the hearing impairments, things like that. How do you accommodate that? How do you accommodate that for people? That has to be thought about by the creators. And motor function impairments, yes, it matters in 2D, but it absolutely matters in immersive experiences, because the way you design it, if you design it in such a way that it's difficult for somebody with a motor function impairment to interact with, they may not even be able to complete the training. So, for example, this one training that I was doing had a clipboard in your hand as a checklist. This is a common thing that I see in training. For whatever reason, people are always carrying around clipboards in training. It has its pros and cons, but that's the first thing everyone does, is give you a clipboard, and it's assigned automatically in this game to your left hand, and you have no option of changing your handedness. So your left hand is occupied. You can't use it because of the clipboard. And the clipboard is where you have your checklist of all the tasks that you need to do step by step through the training. But my left arm was the only arm that I could use because my right arm was frozen. So whenever I had to reach up to do anything, I checked, because it was fire safety training, and I had to reach up with my right arm to check something because my clipboard was in my left hand. I couldn't do it. I physically could not do it because I just could not move my arm. So you really have to think about that. I had to physically change my controller hands and put them on backwards so that I could use my left hand to grab it with my right controller. So definitely something that needs to be considered that people don't usually think about.
That's rough. Well, hopefully your shoulder's feeling better these days. But I've seen.
Yeah, I can move it now.
Oh, good. I've seen one of the games that I love to keep referencing when it comes to accessibility is Until You Fall. And it's not really a workout game. It's more like a fighting kind of game. But you kind of fight, I guess, these like zombie creature things. And at the very start of the game, it has all kinds of options for, whether you are able to do standing play or seated play, or if you're, what your dominant hand is, if you want to switch left to right or right to left. If you're lefty, they have quite a lot of things you can change, even vignetting when moving and all sorts of things, different movement types. So it really, I think, is a great example that keeps it simple, but still takes a lot of that into consideration. Another thing that, I've seen some games fail at pretty miserably is the field of view aspect. You don't want to put too much behind the user so that they have to kind of crane their neck or turn their head around, or so you want to think about, how do you want them to turn around physically, or should it kind of be like, should you keep your objects of interaction kind of within that, primary field of view?
Yeah. You have to think about head comfort zones so that people aren't craning their neck, and eye strain. You have to think about the size of fonts and the weight of the fonts and how far away they are. And
definitely,
the important elements need to be within the field of view, primary or secondary, depending on how important the information is. So you have to think about the physical space that you're creating, the physical digital space that you're creating, and all of these things that you absolutely don't have to think about for 2D all play into design and wayfinding what's their next step, because it's not just going to be a new screen. It's going to be possibly a place. Where do they go? How do they get there? These are all things that need to be thought about. Did anyone have questions?
I have a question about, I guess, sort of UX standards for XR. I've seen some basic stuff per headset, but is it ongoing? Are people developing sort of standards?
Well, there are different standards depending on the headset. I have general standards that are just human-centered, that is content that I create, and here those links. But like if you're wanting to start designing for Apple's Vision Pro, there's going to be some basic standards that are going to carry across any headset, but they are going to have specific standards that are based on their device. I haven't gone through all of them yet to see whether or not I have any concerns. What I have seen so far, I do have questions about, but since I haven't been able to try that headset for sure. But there's going to be overall, which is what I cover, and then if you want to see specific to a headset, like Oculus, Meta has their own documentation, and Apple definitely is going to continue to put out documentation on their specific device as well. I haven't been able to find anything for the Vive HTC headsets, but Oculus and Apple do have documentation for theirs, and Microsoft, although they're not going to be making any difference. But I'll share the link to my stuff afterwards.
Cool, thanks.
I have seen a couple of resources out there that are headset specific. But yeah, I think like a lot of it is, like you said, kind of human-centered design practices that, are specific to virtual reality. And then, and, even for augmented reality, that's, it's kind of its own set of considerations. I think a lot of people, even here in this group, we tend to lump together extended reality when really, the design considerations for augmented reality are pretty different than virtual reality. There might be some overlap, but there's a whole different set of considerations there.
Yeah, and I haven't really been able to write much on augmented reality because I don't have a headset to try. But Apple has for their mobile phones, they have documentation, and Google probably does as well for theirs for Android.
Yeah,
but,
and I think
Meta has been putting out mixed reality documentation.
Yeah, and mobile AR I think is also different than using like pass through on a headset like mixed reality headset. Like I think Quest Pro is mixed reality capable, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. I haven't
Quest
had my hands
3
on
and the
those.
Quest Pro are the best ones out there that are available.
Nice.
But I think the Quest 3 is better than the Pro.
Really awesome.
Mixed reality quality. Yeah.
Have you gotten to play around with one, or just based on research, or?
From what other people have said.
Yeah, I would love to try one out. Not sure I'm in the budget for a new headset right now, but
yeah, same.
sometime soon. But yeah, it's definitely hard to keep up with all the hardware coming out, which is a great thing. I think it's really good for the industry, and I think it's great for designers because the more of these, the more of this technology that gets released and becomes commercially available, the more people there are out there designing for it, and the faster these standards are getting built, because it really is. It's people like you, Aleatha, and people in the design community. I know Anil does work on that too. That that are putting these standards together. Like, the companies, I think, very heavily rely on the communities that use their products to develop these standards of what are design best practices, what are UX best practices, and we're all still kind of figuring it out.
Yeah, it's the human factor side of it. If you understand the human factor side of it, you will be able to apply that and study and learn how to apply that for whatever new technology comes out. So that's one of the reasons that I focus on that content instead of the tools, is because once you know those foundational things, you should be able to research yourself and figure it out for whatever platform.
Yeah, things like
I
button.
can't keep up either.
Sorry, what was that?
I can't keep up either.
Yeah, and I mean, there's going to be little tweaks and idiosyncrasies between devices, like, they might have a slightly different controller layout, and buttons have different primary functions, and that's going to affect your design and your interactions.
Right. And the Apple headsets have a completely different resolution standard. So a lot of the eye strain best practices that I mentioned for standard headsets like Quest may not be applicable to the Apple headset, but I haven't been able to try it because the resolution is so much better on that one. So some of the standards that are out there are because of the quality of the resolution of the headsets. That screen door effect that you get, that I can see right now. I've got a Quest 2. I can see a screen door effect right now. And that's one of the reasons that you get eye strain, is because of that, the resolution. But Apple's headsets, their font sizes, it's I have no clue. I haven't been able to try one, but I think you're going to have a completely different set of standards almost completely different set of standards for Apple, except for the human-centered stuff like ergonomics and
So I have a question. I know I was kind of curious a little bit on your design process. Like, let's say, you have been asked by a business to create some training in virtual reality. I imagine that, the process of where you start and what you consider might be a little bit different for, like, maybe like forklift operator training versus, soft skills, leadership development or something those might have kind of slightly different design processes and considerations. But where do you start? Like, when you're tasked with creating that virtual reality training, and you're given a big thick manual as some content. What are your first steps? Where do you start?
Well, start with stakeholder interviews to see what their goals are with this and why they're wanting to switch and work with the project. I have a playbook on my website. It's called the UX Playbook. I think that's the link, and it shows you like the research and so forth that I would do, whether I'm doing field research with the target audience. So I'd want to know about the target audience for whatever, regardless of the type of training. I would want to research the target audience. So that means, at the very least, interviews with them, contextual interviews. Observations would be ideal, depending on if I can get observation to observe them in their environment and so forth. So I would, first of all, understand the stakeholders and understand the target audience, and then go from there. And I would do some competitive landscape research if there's any, to see how have other people solved this problem before. And then I would storyboard Bodystorm. Bodystorm is a method of using 3D crafting supplies, craft out and figure out spatially what it is you're trying to design before you even get into any tools, storyboarding out flows. Yeah. And I would have to go through all that content. If I was the only one doing the project, I would hope that I would be working with it. So then I could set some global patterns in that case and say, this is how I want scoreboards to look, this is how I want the dialogue to look, dialogue boxes that are accompanying these. We need to make sure the NPCs behave this way, and I would start setting out a bunch of, here's the standards that we're going to have for this project, and then figure out flows and stuff. And depending on if I'm working on it, depends on what type of output I'm doing, or if I'm consulting with a third-party vendor. And did that help?
Yeah. I think, it's a pretty similar process when you're working with traditional, e-learning or training development. That's pretty, I mean, high level. That's kind of the same process we would follow for that. Is kind of digging through your content, doing stakeholder interviews, and kind of brainstorming and working through how has this problem been solved before, what have other people done, which I think sometimes is kind of overlooked. We don't all have to reinvent the wheel. I
Yeah.
tend to find really good ideas or examples of things that have been done before, and it might not always be the budget that I have to work with, but I might be able to borrow some nuggets that's going to give me a better overall design strategy, even if I'm even if it's something that feels like, oh, that's way more than I can do with this project. It can at least give you some things to think about, just to see what other people have been doing out there. And I don't think anybody in the instructional design community, at least, I don't think anybody feels like it's like ripping off or, oh, you stole my idea. It's like, well, don't steal people's work, but like, there's very little capability to like steal those kinds of ideas, I think, anymore, because pretty much everything's been done already. It's hard to be unique in today's day and age, and I think where we can draw inspiration from what other people have done, like, I think that's what are they? There's a turn of phrase, I'm going to butcher it, but it's something like mimicry is the greatest form of flattery or something like that. Um,
Yeah.
and I think we're, at least I believe that we're all here to learn from each other. So I think drawing inspiration from the work of those before you is always a good place to start when you're not sure what direction you want your design to go in, to solve a specific business problem, right? Because that's what training development should be, is solving a business problem.
Yeah. So you would find out what are the problems with the current way of doing things. You would then go out and look at what other people have done, how they solved this problem, what worked and what didn't work with that.
Mm-hmm.
So you can possibly read reviews or even just assess it yourself based on your own expertise, um, to see what's working, what's not working.
Yeah,
And
and
then
what you
see
just
what
said was
gaps,
important.
what
I want
potential
to.
gaps. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. Go ahead.
What potential gaps, like, could yours fill that others aren't, that would make you stand out, if you're, depending on your public thing or not. Yeah, competitive landscape is, it also is beneficial in communicating with your developers what it is you want to create. That's one of the reasons I've been trying. It's difficult because of time, but I've been working on pattern library of how other people have solved problems, so that I can just go grab a video clip and say, hey, I like how they handle teleportation. Let's do it like this, but change it this way to work with our thing, or how they did this UI panel in this situation, things like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think a pattern library is something that would be really helpful to have even in 2D e-learning. Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be really, really nice to be able to pull from. If you work with a lot of different styles, the company I work for works for a lot of different brands. So they all have kind of different visual styles, but it's easier to kind of pull from a set of standards, and have a point of reference than it is to kind of start from scratch with each new template for each new brand. So I can definitely see the value in that.
Yeah.
Something you said earlier I wanted to call out, was figure out why it's not working the way that it is. Like, why are they switching to VR? I think that's really important.
Yeah.
You know, and I think we don't always stop to ask that question a lot. Like, it's easy to get excited, like, oh, I get to work on a VR training project. because I know that doesn't come around very often, for at least not for me and my company, not for most people that I talk to in the industry, unless they work for a VR training company. It's those projects can be fewer and further between. So when you do get it, it's like really exciting, and it's easy to get like kind of caught up in that, and like, oh, I want to do this and I want to do this, and you to get carried away with that. But like, I think it's important to stop and figure out, like, well, why do they want to do VR? What about their current training for this is not working? And how could VR solve that? How could it make it better? I think those are really important questions.
Yeah, that happens throughout any new tech. Anytime any new tech comes out, you always have to ask why. Because, I mean, just like with the iPhone, everyone wanted an app. And we had all these useless apps out there that don't do anything. But the people made them because they think they're cool, because they thought they needed an app.
I feel like that's still kind of the case.
They still do that. The watch, when it came out, it's like, it happens all the time. People just think, oh, this is what everyone else is doing, we need to do this, and that they're not actually solving a problem. So sometimes the solution's not even technology. Sometimes you just need a piece of pen and a piece of paper. It's about what's going to solve the problem.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Sometimes it's just a PDF. Sometimes it's just a QR code that can point them to the right resource in the right moment. And it's easy to overcomplicate. Anil just put in the chat, what is the problem here? What is the desired business outcome? Why is VR instructional strategy better suited for it? And of course, ask if the training is even needed in the first place. It could just be process. And that's absolutely true. I do a lot of process training building. and sometimes it's like, I hate to break it to you guys, but, e-learning is not going to replace reading. They are different things for different purposes. Jane's giving me some thumbs down. Oh no. I think different things for different purposes. But tell us what you
Sorry
think.
About that. Sorry, Pat, I got dogs on my lap.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad it wasn't what I said. But yeah, I think that's a great point, Anil. Ask if training is even needed in the first place, because I'm going to plug Kathy Moore's book, Map It, which talks about how to bring training design and objectives back to business goals. That's an absolute must read. For anybody in training design or instructional design. I think even for VR, it's really relevant because in the end, training is about solving a business goal and solving a problem and making it, easier and better for people to do their jobs. And, we don't really know how to do that if we don't know what the problem is in the first place, right? It's easy to just make training, but it's not valuable if we don't know what problems we're trying to tackle. Well, awesome. We are almost at time, but we have a couple more minutes. If anybody has any other questions for Aleatha.
I just had a question about what tool you would use for your storyboard.
For what? Storyboarding?
Storyboarding after you've done whatever it was, the initial body storming. That's it. Yeah. So after that, what tool would you use?
Storyboarding, you can use any kind of sketching tool. It doesn't matter. And you don't have to be an artist either to storyboard. If you can draw stick figures, you can storyboard. So it doesn't have to be high fidelity as long as it can communicate whatever it is that you're trying to do. But any sketching tool. My favorite tool to use for that is my iPad Pro with Paper by 53.
So Neil was asking, do you storyboard in 3D or 2D?
I usually just do 2D sketches, but you can use a tool like ShapesXR to do 3D storyboarding. I have done that. It depends on the team that you're on, and so forth. But yeah, you can use ShapesXR, or you can rapid prototype with a tool like Bezier, because that'll do both mobile and XR.
Yeah, I second ShapesXR or Gravity Sketch. I think are both great for putting in kind of a rough prototype in 3D if you want to try to storyboard in 3D. I think those are both really great tools to just try out in VR and get kind of familiar with how to use for the storyboarding process. They're fun to just model in and draw in, but and sculpt, I guess, is a better term. Being that it's 3-dimensional, they're fun sculpting tools, but I think that the real value in learning how to use ShapesXR or Gravity Sketch comes in play when you're trying to kind of get the idea out into a 3D environment for what it is that you want to storyboard.
Yeah.
But most of the time I use PowerPoint. There's some templates, some storyboarding templates online, and I've shared those with the session I've done at Learning Solutions. But you can find those. Usually, you can if you just Google VR storyboarding template. You're bound to find something, and it kind of looks like basically, I guess, an oval shape with like a little person headset in the middle,
and in the middle.
Yeah, and
Fits in mid curly.
Made
that.
Yeah, and it's fantastic. There's also, throw that into PowerPoint, and you can drop in different objects or icons for things. That's one strategy I like to use, because then I don't have to actually draw it, because I am a terrible artist. So I love dropping in an icon, placing it where I want it, resizing it, coloring it. If I want to color code stuff, you can do that. So I find that real helpful too.
Yeah. There's different types of storyboarding depending on where you are in the process. If you're just doing there's high fidelity storyboarding, there's detailed storyboards, there's that get more into micro interaction stuff. There's all kinds, but it just depends on where you are in the process. But I have used ShapesXR. I've used art sketch tools. So yeah, it just depends on where you are. I wish back when I was on the VR training team where I was creating training that ShapesXR was a thing back then, because it would have made my life easier to communicate things with the team. And I do recommend getting into tools like that, because a lot of people they want to stick to their 2D tools. They don't want to get into XR and use tools like ShapesXR, because it's hard, at least at first, until you get used to thinking about 3D space and designing for 3D. And I see a lot of students trying to avoid it because they don't like it, but it's to your benefit to do it, because one of the biggest issues that I see students having are scale and 360 space, thinking in 3-dimensional 360 space to scale, because they'll get all over the place with their scale of objects if they're not actually in there trying it in 3D.
One more thing I know I've seen in some of the resources that you've shared in the past, Aleatha, and I've seen it in some of Neil's work as well, is using flowcharts for mapping out your interactions. And I think that's a really important part of the storyboarding process if you want to give us kind of a 1 or 2 minute rundown on that. Or just initial thoughts.
Yeah, for that you can just use any kind of flowcharting tool, mind mapping tool, or Miro. I use Miro a lot because it's just thinking about your flow with visually. So I'm a visual person, so seeing the different elements, especially if you're doing step-by-step training and you want consistency, it's actually useful to visually lay it out that way. So that you can see where there's any inconsistencies in your process, which could potentially cause confusion to somebody.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. I know Anil submitted something for one of our design challenges in the past, and I was just like, yep, flowchart works well for procedural stuff for sure. And even just kind of mapping out, like, where do they start? What is the first thing they see? What happens when they click on this? What happened, or, select that, or, what happens when they pick up this object, or, or at least what's the intention. And I think it's helpful to kind of map out those interactions, just in a real simple flowchart kind of way, so that you can kind of just, wrap your head around, like, have I thought of all of the different things that need to happen in this process?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that was, Anil says it will be easy to communicate both to the designer and developer, and it helps you to do this before you sketch it. Yep, totally. Yeah, communication is key, and it's the more that you can like put out there for your team to work with. I think the better your end product's going to be.
Yeah, it's very important to communicate often and well, especially in VR, way more so than 2D, because it is way more expensive to make changes later.
Yeah,
than it is with 2D.
That's a very good point. It's not always as easy as just opening a story file and copy and pasting some text over something, and then hit republish button and you're done. Sometimes it can be a lot more complicated than that. So that's a very good point. Can get expensive.
Which means it often doesn't happen.
Right. Yep. Sometimes people decide, like, oh well, we'll just stick with it then, and that's, unfortunately, money talks.
We'll tell the trainer to talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. It's almost as expensive as making an animated short movie or short experience or game, and it can be, depending on how extensive your training is, and what all you're covering. I mean, it definitely can be that, or even more.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that was a great conversation. Thank you, Aleatha, for joining us, and thanks, Anil, and both Snail. I'm sorry, I don't know who that is, but thank you both, Snail. And I know Jane was in here for a while as well. And yeah, to anybody listening on the recordings, I do plan eventually to get these loaded up onto YouTube. I know I'm a few months behind, but do have some downtime around the holidays to do that. So I hope everyone's having a wonderful holiday. And yeah, thanks again, Aleatha, for a great conversation on design and design process and UX for VR. And yeah, we will see you guys all in 2024. Meetups, as always, are the last Wednesday of the month at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, here in Spatial. All right, thanks. Happy New Year, everybody. Have a great holiday.
New Year.